The bus pulled into the station at 7 in the morning, and Darnell stepped off with one suitcase and a backpack that held everything he owned. He stood there for a moment, looking up at the buildings in the distance. Somewhere behind those trees and fancy gates was Weston University, one of the most respected schools in the country for mathematics. And somehow, against all odds, he had earned a full scholarship to study there. He was 20 years old. He had grown up in a rough part of Chicago, raised by his grandmother in a small 2-bedroom apartment where the heat didn't always work in winter. His mother had passed when he was 6. His father was never in the picture. But his grandmother, a woman who had worked as a hotel maid for 40 years, always told him the same thing. She said that his brain was a gift from God and that nobody could ever take that away from him. She was right about the gift. By the time Darnell was 10, he was solving algebra problems meant for high schoolers. By 14, he had taught himself calculus using old textbooks from the library and free videos on the internet. His teachers didn't know what to do with him. Some of them thought he was cheating. Others just ignored him because they didn't have time to deal with a kid who was so far ahead. But Darnell kept going. He would stay up late at night with a flashlight under his blanket, working through equations while the rest of the world slept. When the acceptance letter came from Weston, his grandmother cried for an hour straight. She held that piece of paper like it was made of gold. Nobody from their neighborhood had ever gone to a school like this. Nobody from their family had ever even finished college. And here was her grandson, getting a free ride to study with the best professors in the country. But as Darnell walked through those campus gates for the first time, he felt something shift in the air. The students walking past him were different. They wore expensive clothes. They carried laptops that cost more than his grandmother made in a month. They laughed and talked in groups, and not a single one of them looked like him. He was the only black face he could see in any direction. He told himself it didn't matter. He was here to learn, not to make friends. He found his dorm room, unpacked his things, and got ready for his first day of classes. The trouble started. Almost immediately, his first class was advanced linear algebra, taught by a professor named Dr. Warren. This was the honors track. The class for students who were serious about mathematics. Darnell had been looking forward to it for months. He walked in early, found a seat near the front, and opened his notebook. Dr. Warren was a tall man in his 60s with gray hair and glasses that sat low on his nose. He walked in exactly on time, set his briefcase on the desk, and began calling roll. When he got to Darnell's name, he paused. He looked up from his paper, scanned the room, and his eyes landed on Darnell. There was a flicker of something in the professor's expression. Surprise, maybe? Or confusion. He stared at Darnell for a moment longer than necessary, then said in a slow voice, "Mr. Williams, are you certain you're in the correct classroom? This is the advanced section." Darnell felt his stomach tighten. Every other student in the room turned to look at him. He could feel their eyes on his skin. "Yes, sir," he said calmly. "I'm in the right place." Dr. Warren raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. He continued with the roll call and then launched into his lecture. But something had changed. Darnell could feel it. The professor never looked in his direction again. When Darnell raised his hand to answer a question, Dr. Warren called on someone else. When Darnell submitted his first assignment, a problem set that he had completed perfectly, the professor handed it back with no comments and a grade that was lower than it should have been. At first, Darnell thought he was imagining things. Maybe the professor was just strict. Maybe he graded everyone harshly. But then he started paying attention to how Dr. Warren treated the other students. He smiled at them. He encouraged them. He invited them to ask questions after class. With Darnell, there was nothing. Just cold silence and that same look of doubt every time their eyes met. A few weeks into the semester, Darnell turned in a paper that he was particularly proud of. He had found a shortcut to solve a complex theorem, a method that was elegant and efficient. He had spent hours checking his work, making sure every step was perfect. When he handed it to Dr. Warren, he felt a small spark of hope. Surely this would prove that he belonged here. 2 days later, Dr. Warren called him into his office. The professor sat behind a large wooden desk covered in papers and books. He didn't ask Darnell to sit down. He just held up the paper and said, "Where did you copy this from?" Darnell blinked. "Excuse me?" "This proof," Dr. Warren said, tapping the paper with his finger. "This is not the work of an undergraduate student. So I'll ask you again. Where did you find it?" For a moment, Darnell couldn't speak. The accusation hung in the air like a slap. He had worked on that proof for 2 weeks. He had figured it out himself, step by step, alone in his dorm room at 2 in the morning. And now this man was telling him he must have stolen it. "I didn't copy it from anywhere," Darnell said, keeping his voice steady. "That's my own work." Dr. Warren leaned back in his chair and studied him. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and heavy. Finally, the professor pointed to the chalkboard on the wall. "Then prove it," he said. "Solve this problem right now, in front of me. Show me you actually understand what you wrote." He wrote a complex equation on the board, something that would take most students an hour to work through. Darnell walked up to the chalkboard, picked up the chalk, and started writing. His hand moved quickly, confidently. He didn't hesitate. He didn't second-guess himself. Within 15 minutes, the solution was complete. He turned around to face Dr. Warren. The professor was staring at the board with an expression that Darnell couldn't quite read. Was it shock? Embarrassment? Whatever it was, it disappeared quickly, replaced by that same cold mask. "Fine," Dr. Warren said quietly. "You may go." No apology. No acknowledgement that he had been wrong. Just a dismissal, like Darnell was a servant being sent away. Darnell walked out of that office with his hands shaking. Not from fear, but from anger. He had just proven himself in the most direct way possible, and it still wasn't enough. He was starting to understand that for some people, no amount of proof would ever be enough. They had already decided what he was before he even opened his mouth. That night he called his grandmother. He didn't tell her everything. He didn't want her to worry. But she could hear the tiredness in his voice. "Baby," she said softly, "you listen to me. Those people don't know who you are. They don't know where you come from or what you've been through. But you know, and God knows. So you keep your head high and you keep doing what you do best? You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Good, now get some rest. And call me on Sunday like you always do." He hung up the phone and sat in the darkness of his dorm room for a long time. Outside his window, the campus was quiet. Students were probably out at parties or studying in groups at the library. But Darnell was alone, just like he had always been. He pulled out his notebook and started working on a new problem. It was something he had been thinking about for months, a mathematical puzzle that had stumped experts for decades. Everyone said it was impossible. Everyone said it couldn't be done, but Darnell had stopped caring what everyone said. The weeks turned into months, and Darnell quickly learned that Dr. Warren was not the only problem. The entire mathematics department seemed to operate by the same unwritten rules. There were doors that opened easily for some students and stayed firmly shut for others. And Darnell was always on the wrong side of those doors. His second professor was a woman named Dr. Hoffman. She taught number theory, a subject that Darnell had been fascinated with since he was a teenager. Prime numbers, patterns, the hidden music inside mathematics. This was the stuff that made his heart beat faster. He walked into her class on the first day with genuine excitement, hoping that maybe things would be different here. They were not different. Dr. Hoffman was polite on the surface. She smiled at everyone and spoke in a soft, friendly voice. But there was something underneath that smile that Darnell recognized right away. It was the same thing he had seen in Dr. Warren's eyes: doubt, suspicion, the quiet assumption that he didn't really belong. She never accused him of cheating like Dr. Warren had. Her approach was more subtle. She would explain things to him slowly, using small words as if English was not his first language. When he answered questions correctly in class, she would nod and say things like, "Good effort," or "That's a nice try," not correct, not excellent. Just words that made it sound like he had gotten lucky. One day, She assigned the class to form study groups for an upcoming exam. Darnell looked around, waiting for someone to invite him to join their group. Nobody did. The white students paired off with each other, laughing and chatting like old friends. Darnell sat alone at his desk, pretending to read his notes. After class, Dr. Hoffman approached him. She had that same soft smile on her face. "Darnell," she said, "I've arranged for you to join a special study group. It meets on Tuesday evenings in the basement of the library. I think you'll find it very helpful." He thanked her and showed up that Tuesday, expecting to find other students from his class. Instead, he found a group of freshmen who were struggling with basic algebra. The tutor running the session looked surprised to see him. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" she asked. Darnell almost laughed. He was getting that question a lot these days. He stayed for 10 minutes, helped a freshman solve a simple equation, and then left. He never went back. But the message was clear. Dr. Hoffman thought he needed remedial help. She had looked at his face and decided he must be struggling. Even though his grades were among the highest in her class, the thing that hurt the most was not the insults or the doubt. It was the opportunities that kept passing him by. Every semester, the mathematics department offered research positions to top students. These were prestigious spots that looked great on graduate school applications. Students who got these positions worked directly with professors on real mathematical problems. They got their names on published papers. They got recommendation letters that could open doors for the rest of their lives. Darnell wanted one of those positions more than anything. He had been dreaming about it since he first applied to Weston. So when he heard that Dr. Hoffman was looking for students to join her research team, he went to her office during her posted hours and knocked on the door. She invited him in with that same polite smile. He explained that he was interested in her research on prime number distribution. He told her about the work he had done on his own, the papers he had read, the ideas he had been developing. He spoke with passion, with clarity, with everything he had. When he finished, Dr. Hoffman nodded slowly. "That's very impressive," she said. "But I'm afraid all the positions have already been filled. We finalized the team last week." Darnell's heart sank. "All of them?" "Yes, I'm sorry. But keep working hard, and maybe next year there will be an opening." He thanked her and left. But something felt wrong. He couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling him the whole truth. A few days later, he found out he was right. He was walking past the faculty lounge when he heard voices coming through the open door. He recognized Dr. Hoffman's voice immediately. She was talking to another professor, someone he didn't know. "We just brought on 2 more students," she was saying. "Bradley and Thompson. Both very promising." Darnell stopped walking. Bradley was a student in his number theory class. He was a nice enough guy, but his grades were lower than Darnell's. Thompson was even worse. He had barely passed the midterm. The positions weren't filled. Dr. Hoffman had lied to his face. He stood there in the hallway, frozen. Part of him wanted to burst into that room and demand an explanation. Part of him wanted to scream. But another part of him, a quieter part, told him to keep walking. Making a scene wouldn't change anything. These people had already made up their minds about him. No amount of arguing was going to fix that. He went back to his dorm room and sat on the edge of his bed. For the first time since arriving at Weston, he let himself feel the full weight of what was happening. It wasn't just one bad professor. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a system designed to keep people like him on the outside, no matter how hard they worked, no matter how talented they were. He thought about transferring. There were other schools out there, places where maybe he would be treated fairly. He thought about quitting altogether. Maybe his grandmother had been wrong. Maybe some doors just weren't meant to open for people like him. That Sunday, he called home like he always did. His grandmother answered on the second ring. "How you doing, baby?" she asked. He hesitated. He didn't want to lie to her. But he also didn't want to break her heart by telling her the truth. "It's hard, Grandma," he finally said. "Harder than I thought it would be." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle but firm. "You listen to me, Darnell. I didn't raise you to quit when things get hard. I raised you to fight. Now, I know those people out there don't see what I see when I look at you. They don't know that you taught yourself mathematics while other kids were out playing. They don't know that you stayed up every night working towards something bigger. But and that's what matters." He felt tears building behind his eyes. He blinked them away. "What if it's not enough?" he asked quietly. "What if I keep trying and they never let me in?" "Then you build your own door," she said. "You hear me? You don't wait for them to give you permission. You show them something they can't ignore. Something so big and so brilliant that they have no choice but to pay attention." He didn't know what to say, but something in her words lit a spark inside him. A small flame that had almost gone out. After he hung up, he sat alone in the silence of his room. He thought about everything that had happened. The doubts, the dismissals, the closed doors. And then he thought about the problem he had been working on at night. The one that everyone said was impossible. It was a mathematical puzzle, connected to one of the biggest unsolved problems in the entire field. Brilliant minds had tried and failed for over a century. Professors with decades of experience had given up on it. And here was Darnell, a 20-year-old kid from Chicago, with no connections and no resources, thinking he might have found a way forward. It was crazy. It was arrogant. It was probably hopeless, but his grandmother's words echoed in his mind. "Build your own door." He opened his notebook to a fresh page. He picked up his pencil, and he got to work. Darnell started living a double life. During the day, he went to classes, sat in the back row, and did what he needed to do to keep his grades up. He stopped raising his hand. He stopped trying to impress the professors. He gave them exactly what they expected and nothing more, but at night, everything changed. Every evening after dinner, he would walk to the university library. But he didn't go to the main floors where the other students gathered in groups, talking and laughing over their textbooks. Instead, he took the stairs all the way down to the basement level. It was a forgotten place, filled with old journals, dusty shelves, and flickering lights that nobody had bothered to fix. Most students didn't even know it existed. It was perfect. He would find a table in the corner, spread out his notebooks, and work until his eyes burned. Sometimes he stayed until 2 or 3 in the morning, only stopping when the security guard made his rounds and politely asked him to leave. The problem he was working on was connected to something called the Riemann hypothesis. Now, the Riemann hypothesis itself was one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in all of mathematics. It had been around for over 150 years, and nobody had ever been able to prove it. Entire careers had been built trying to crack it. Some of the smartest people in history had failed. Darnell wasn't crazy enough to think he could solve the whole thing. But there was a smaller piece of the puzzle, a specific lemma related to how prime numbers behave in certain patterns. If someone could prove this lemma, it would open new doors for understanding the bigger problem. It would be a major breakthrough. The kind of thing that got published in the best journals and changed the way mathematicians thought about numbers. Every professor he had ever spoken to told him it was a waste of time. They said the lemma was too hard, too complex, too far beyond what any undergraduate could handle. One professor had actually laughed when Darnell mentioned it, but Darnell kept working anyway. Night after night, he filled notebook after notebook with equations and diagrams and half-formed ideas. Some nights he felt like he was getting close to something. Other nights he wanted to throw everything in the trash and give up. The math was brutal. It twisted his brain into knots. There were moments when he stared at the same page for hours, unable to see a way forward, but he refused to stop. Because every time he thought about quitting, he remembered the way Dr. Warren had looked at him. He remembered Dr. Hoffman's polite lies. He remembered all the doors that had been closed in his face. And that anger, that fire in his chest, pushed him to keep going. One night in early spring, something unexpected happened. Darnell was deep in concentration, surrounded by piles of papers and empty coffee cups, when he heard footsteps coming down the basement stairs. He tensed up, expecting the security guard. But instead, a young woman appeared around the corner of the shelves. She was Asian, maybe a few years older than him, with short black hair and glasses. She was carrying a stack of old journals and looked just as surprised to see him as he was to see her. "Oh," she said, stopping in her tracks. "I didn't know anyone else came down here." Darnell relaxed a little. "I could say the same thing." She smiled and walked over to a nearby table, setting down her journals. "I'm a graduate student," she explained. "Third year. I come down here sometimes when I need to think. The main library is too noisy." He nodded. He understood that completely. She introduced herself as Lynn. She was working on her dissertation, something to do with analytic number theory. They talked for a few minutes about their research, and Darnell found himself opening up in a way he hadn't with anyone at Weston. There was something about her that felt safe. She didn't look at him with suspicion or doubt. She just looked at him like he was another person who loved math. At some point, she glanced over at his notebooks. Her eyes widened. "Wait," she said slowly. "Is this what I think it is?" Darnell hesitated. He hadn't shown his work to anyone. He was afraid of being laughed at again, of being told he was wasting his time, but Lynn didn't laugh. She pulled up a chair and started reading through his pages, her finger tracing the lines of equations. For a long time, she didn't say anything. Darnell sat there, heart pounding, waiting for the verdict. Finally, she looked up at him. Her expression was serious. "This is remarkable," she said quietly. "Do you understand what you've done here? This approach, this angle you're taking, I've never seen anything like it." "Where did you learn this?" "I taught myself," he said. "Mostly from books and online lectures." She stared at him for a moment like she was trying to figure out if he was joking. Then she shook her head in disbelief. "You need to show this to someone," she said. "A professor, an advisor, someone who can help you develop it further." Darnell laughed bitterly. "I've tried. They don't exactly take me seriously around here." Lynn's face changed. She understood what he meant without him having to explain. She had probably faced her own challenges as a woman in a field dominated by men. Maybe not the same as his, but close enough. "Then we won't go to them," she said firmly. "At least not yet. But you can't do this alone. The math is too complex. You need someone to check your work, to push back on your ideas, to help you see the blind spots." He looked at her, unsure. Trust didn't come easy to him anymore. "Why would you help me?" he asked it. She thought about it for a moment. "Because I know what it's like to be underestimated," she said. "And because this work deserves to exist. Whether those professors believe in you or not, the math doesn't lie. What you're doing here is real." From that night on, Lynn became his secret ally. They met in the basement library 2 or 3 times a week. She would review his proofs, point out errors, suggest new directions. She had access to advanced journals and research papers that Darnell couldn't get on his own, and she smuggled them to him like contraband. They worked together for hours, arguing about equations, celebrating small victories, pushing through the frustrating dead ends. Darnell had never had a partner like this before. His whole life he had been alone with his math. Now, for the first time, he had someone who believed in him. Someone who saw his potential instead of his skin color. Meanwhile, nothing changed in his regular classes. Dr. Warren continued to ignore him. Dr. Hoffman continued to speak to him like he was slow. Neither of them had any idea what he was building in that basement. One night, after a particularly long session, Lynn leaned back in her chair and looked at him. "You know," she said, "when you finish this proof, it's going to change everything. They won't be able to ignore you anymore." Darnell shook his head. "I don't care about them. I'm not doing this for their approval." "Then why are you doing it?" He thought about the question for a long time. He thought about his grandmother, about the apartment in Chicago, about all the nights he had spent studying by flashlight because he believed there was something more waiting for him out there. "Because I need to know if I can," he said finally. "Because my whole life people have told me what I'm not capable of, and I'm tired of believing them." Lynn smiled. "Then let's finish this thing." Darnell picked up his pencil and got back to work. Outside the basement windows, the campus was dark and quiet. But inside that forgotten room, something was taking shape. Something that would soon shake the entire mathematics world to its core. 6 months. That's how long it took. 6 months of sleepless nights, cold coffee, and pages filled with equations that sometimes led somewhere and sometimes led nowhere. 6 months of doubt and frustration and moments where Darnell wanted to throw his notebooks against the wall and walk away forever. 6 months of Lynn sitting across from him, pushing him forward when he wanted to quit, catching mistakes he couldn't see, believing in him when he couldn't believe in himself. And then, on a quiet Thursday night in November, it happened. Darnell was alone in the basement library. Lynn had gone home hours ago, exhausted from her own dissertation work. The building was silent except for the hum of the old heating system. Darnell had been staring at the same page for almost an hour, trying to find the missing piece that would connect everything together. He had been stuck on this one step for weeks. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the other side was right there, but not being able to see the bridge. He had tried everything. Different approaches, different angles, different methods. Nothing worked. But that night, something shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was all those months of work finally clicking into place. But as Darnell stared at his equations, he suddenly saw it. The connection he had been searching for. It was so simple, so elegant, that he almost laughed out loud. How had he missed it before? His hands started moving before his brain could catch up. He wrote furiously, filling one page, then another, then another. The proof flowed out of him like water. Every step led perfectly to the next. Every piece fit together like a puzzle that had been waiting to be solved. An hour later, he put down his pencil and looked at what he had created. It was done. The proof was complete. He sat there in the silence, his heart pounding. He read through it again, slowly this time, checking every line. It was solid. It was airtight. It was real. For a long moment, he didn't know what to feel. He had spent so long chasing this thing that he had almost forgotten what it would be like to catch it. Now that it was in his hands, he felt strangely calm. Like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He pulled out his phone and sent Lynn a message. 3 words, I did it. She called him back within seconds, her voice thick with sleep but filled with excitement. Are you serious? You finished it? Send me the pages right now. He took photos of his work and sent them to her. For the next 20 minutes, she was silent, reading through everything. Darnell paced around the basement, too wired to sit still. Finally, her voice came through the phone again. Darnell, this is it. This is actually it? Do you understand what you've done? He did understand. But hearing her say it made it feel real. The next few days were a blur. Lynn helped him type up the proof properly, formatting it the way academic journals required. They checked every equation, every symbol, every word. They couldn't afford a single mistake. When it was ready, they faced a decision. Darnell wanted to submit it to the Journal of Pure and Applied Mathematics. It was one of the most respected publications in the field. If they accepted his paper, it would be seen by every serious mathematician in the world. But there was a problem. If he submitted it under his own name, listing himself as an undergraduate at Weston University, the professors here would find out. Dr. Warren would find out. Dr. Hoffman would find out. And Darnell wasn't sure what they would do. Maybe they would try to take credit. Maybe they would try to block the publication somehow. Maybe they would find some way to twist the situation against him. Lynn had an idea. Submit it anonymously, she said. Just use your initials. Don't list any university. Let the work speak for itself. It was risky. Journals liked to know who they were publishing. But Lynn knew one of the assistant editors, a former classmate who owed her a favor. She made some calls and explained the situation without giving too many details. The editor agreed to let the submission go through with just the initials D.W. and no institutional affiliation. Darnell sent the paper and waited. The waiting was almost harder than the work itself. Every day he checked his email 100 times. Every night he lay awake wondering if the reviewers would find some flaw he had missed. What if he was wrong? What if the whole thing fell apart under professional scrutiny? 3 weeks later, he got a response. The paper had been accepted. Not just accepted, but accepted with high praise from the reviewers. One of them had written that the proof was elegant, original, and potentially groundbreaking. Another had called it the most significant contribution to prime number theory in a decade. Darnell read those words over and over again. Unable to believe they were about him, the publication went live in December. Within days, it was causing a sensation in the mathematics community. Professors and researchers around the world were talking about the mysterious D, who had seemingly come out of nowhere to solve a problem that had stumped experts for generations. Discussion threads exploded on academic forums. Who was this person? Where did they come from? Some people guessed it was a professor from MIT working under a pseudonym. Others thought it might be someone from Cambridge or Oxford. A few wild theories suggested it was an artificial intelligence program. Nobody guessed that it was a 20-1-year-old black kid from Chicago who worked in a forgotten basement library because the professors at his own school wouldn't give him the time of day. Back at Weston, the mathematics department was buzzing with excitement about the paper. Darnell sat in Dr. Warren's class one afternoon and listened as the professor spent half the lecture discussing the proof. He called it brilliant and masterful. He said whoever wrote it was clearly a rare genius. Darnell kept his face completely still. He didn't smile. He didn't react. He just sat there, taking notes like everyone else, while the man who had accused him of cheating praised his work without knowing it. Dr. Hoffman was even more enthusiastic. In her number theory class, she handed out printed copies of the paper and told everyone to study it closely. "This is the kind of work we should all aspire to," she said. "Whoever DW is, they've changed the field forever." Darnell took his copy and put it in his bag without a word. That night he called his grandmother. He still hadn't told her everything. He wanted to wait until the moment was right. "You sound different," she said. "Something good happened?" He smiled into the phone. "Yeah, Grandma. Something good happened. Well, don't keep me in suspense." "Soon," he said. "I'll tell you everything soon. I promise." A few weeks later, the journal editors reached out to him. The paper had received so much attention that they wanted to feature the author in a special announcement. They wanted DW to reveal their identity publicly. Darnell thought about it for a long time. He talked to Lynn about it, weighing the options. He could stay anonymous forever if he wanted. He could let the work stand on its own and never deal with the fallout, but that wasn't why he had done this. He hadn't spent 6 months in that basement just to hide in the shadows. He had done it to prove something. To himself. To his grandmother. To everyone who had ever doubted him, he sent the editors a reply. He told them he would reveal his identity, but he had one condition. He wanted to do it at Western University's annual mathematics symposium, in front of the entire department. The editors were intrigued. They agreed to coordinate the announcement. Darnell marked the date on his calendar and started counting down the days. The moment was coming, and he was ready. The day of the symposium arrived on a cold morning in February. Snow was falling softly outside, covering the campus in a blanket of white. Inside the Morrison Auditorium, the largest lecture hall at Western University, hundreds of people were finding their seats. This was the biggest event of the year for the mathematics department. Professors, graduate students, visiting scholars from other universities, and even some undergraduate students had gathered to hear about the latest research and discoveries in the field. The room buzzed with conversation and excitement. In the front row sat Dr. Warren and Dr. Hoffman, side by side. They were dressed in their finest academic attire, looking important and self-satisfied. They had no idea what was about to happen. Darnell stood backstage, hidden behind a heavy curtain. His heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. He was wearing the only suit he owned, a second-hand navy blue jacket his grandmother had bought him for his high school graduation. It was a little worn at the elbows, but it was clean and pressed. He looked good. He felt ready. Lynn was standing beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" she asked quietly. He took a deep breath. "Yeah, I think so. You've earned this moment, she said. Every single second of it. Don't let anyone take that away from you. He nodded. She was right. He had earned this. Every sleepless night, every dismissed question, every closed door had led to this exact moment. And he wasn't going to waste it out in the auditorium. The editor from the Journal of Pure and Applied Mathematics was taking the stage. She was a tall woman with silver hair and a commanding presence. The room fell silent as she approached the microphone. Good morning, everyone, she began. Thank you for joining us today. As many of you know, the mathematics community has been captivated in recent months by a remarkable paper on prime number distribution. The proof, published under the initials D, has been called one of the most significant contributions to the field in decades. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the audience. Today, the author of that paper has chosen to reveal their identity for the first time, and they have asked to do so here at Western University, in front of this distinguished gathering. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Dr. Warren leaned forward in his seat. His eyes bright with curiosity, Dr. Hoffman whispered something to the colleague sitting next to her. The editor smiled. Without further delay, I would like to invite the author to join me on stage. Darnell stepped out from behind the curtain. For a moment, nothing happened. The audience just stared at him, confused. A young black man in a second-hand suit walking slowly across the stage toward the podium. This wasn't what they had expected. This wasn't what anyone had expected. Then the recognition began to spread. A few students in the back rows gasped. Someone whispered his name. Darnell saw Dr. Warren's face go pale, his mouth falling open in disbelief. Dr. Hoffman looked like she had seen a ghost. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. Darnell reached the podium and stood there, looking out at the sea of faces. The silence in the room was deafening. He leaned into the microphone and spoke. My name is Darnell Williams. I'm a junior here at Western University, majoring in mathematics, and I am the author of the paper you've all been talking about. The room erupted. Some people gasped. Others started whispering frantically to each other. A few students in the back actually started clapping, but the applause died quickly. Swallowed by the sheer shock that filled the auditorium, Darnell waited for the noise to settle. Then he continued. I wrote that proof in the basement of the campus library. I worked on it for 6 months, mostly between midnight and 3 in the morning. I did it alone, with no funding, no research position, and no support from this department. He paused, letting those words sink in. Some of you might be wondering why I didn't come forward sooner. Why I submitted anonymously. Why I kept this secret for so long. He looked directly at Dr. Warren. The professor's face had gone from pale to red. He looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. The truth is, I tried to show my work to the people in this department. I tried to earn a place on a research team. I tried to be taken seriously as a student and as a mathematician. But every time I tried, I was turned away. I was told I didn't belong. I was accused of cheating. I was sent to remedial study groups. I was lied to about positions that were supposedly filled when they weren't. The auditorium was completely silent now. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I'm not telling you this to complain, Darnell said, his voice steady. I'm telling you this because it matters. Because somewhere out there, right now, there's another kid like me. A kid who loves math but doesn't have anyone who believes in them. A kid who's being told they're not smart enough, not good enough, not the right kind of person to succeed in this field. He felt his throat tighten, but he pushed through. I want that kid to know something. I want them to know that the people who doubt you don't get to decide your future. Your talent is yours. Your hard work is yours. And no amount of prejudice or ignorance can take that away from you. He turned to look at the screen behind him, where his proof was now displayed in full. Pages and pages of elegant equations, the work that had changed everything. Mathematics doesn't care about the color of your skin, he said. Numbers don't see race. They only see truth. And the truth is right here, on this screen for everyone to see. He stepped back from the podium. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncertain. Then, somewhere in the middle of the auditorium, someone started clapping. Then another person joined in. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet, applauding. Students, professors, visiting scholars, everyone. The sound was thunderous, overwhelming, like a wave crashing over the stage. Darnell stood there, taking it in. He saw Lynn in the back of the room, tears streaming down her face, clapping harder than anyone. He saw students he had never spoken to cheering for him. He saw the faces of people who finally saw him for who he really was. He also saw Dr. Warren and Dr. Hoffman. They were not clapping. They sat frozen in their seats, their faces masks of shame and disbelief. They knew what was coming. The questions, the investigations, the accountability, their careers would never be the same, but Darnell didn't feel satisfaction looking at them. He didn't feel revenge or triumph. He just felt tired. Tired and relieved that it was finally over. After the symposium, everything changed. The story spread quickly, picked up by news outlets and social media. Darnell became a symbol of perseverance and brilliance in the face of injustice. Universities from around the country reached out with offers for graduate programs, research positions, and full scholarships, but the first call he made was to his grandmother. She answered on the first ring, like she had been waiting. "I saw you on the news," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Baby, I saw what you did." "I couldn't have done it without you, Grandma," he said. "Everything I am is because of you." She was crying now, and so was he. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "I always knew. From the day you were born, I always knew you were meant for something special." A few months later, Darnell was offered the youngest research fellowship in Weston's history. He accepted, but on his own terms. He used his new platform to create a mentorship program for underrepresented students in mathematics and science. He wanted to make sure that no one else would have to fight the battles he had fought alone. His grandmother flew out for the ceremony. She sat in the front row this time, wearing her best dress, smiling wider than he had ever seen her smile when they called his name and he walked across the stage to accept his fellowship. She stood up and cheered louder than everyone else in the room, and Darnell knew, in that moment, that everything had been worth it. Not the fame, not the recognition, not the vindication, just this. His grandmother's face, shining with pride, telling him without words what she had told him his whole life. "You are enough. You have always been enough."